My father sold me for a bag of gold and a promise of salt because in the dregs, being noticed was a death sentence. I stood in the bitter mud of our yard, rubbing crushed stinkweed over my neck to hide my scent. Truth be told, the smell was enough to make a vulture gag, but it kept me safe from the hungry eyes of wandering rogue wolves. My gift was a curse that felt like a burning coal in my chest. I was a calmer, a rare type of wolf who could make a killer feel like a kitten just by being near. Because of that, I had spent my whole life pretending to be a plain, scentless human girl with no value at all. I looked at my small, cracked hands and wondered how much longer I could hide the power that hummed under my skin. At that moment, the ground began to shake with the thrum of heavy paws. Next, my father ran out of the shack. He looked like he had seen a ghost. "Clara, stop that rubbing and get inside," he hissed, his voice cracking like a dry twig. "They are here. The king's men are here for the debt." I wiped my hands on my apron. "The debt? You said we had until the moon was full, Papa. You said you had a plan." He wouldn't look at me. He just stared at the mud. "Plans change, Clara. The king is sick. He's gone feral. And the prince is buying up every commer in the 5 packs. They paid our debt. In fact, they paid it twice over." I felt a coldness that started in my toes and moved to my heart. "You sold me," I whispered. My voice sounded small, like a mouse in a storm. "You didn't just pay a debt. You sold your daughter to a monster." Then my father reached out to touch my shoulder, but I pulled away. My body moved on instinct, and I felt the first spark of my wolf growling deep inside. "He said it's for your siblings, Clara," he pleaded. "Think of the salt. Think of the warm blankets for the winter. You want them to freeze? You want them to starve?" I didn't know what scared her more, if it was the giant wolves coming up the hill or the man standing in front of me as my father. But because he was my father, I wanted to forgive him. But my heart was already turning into stone. In the span of a breath, the royal enforcers burst through the trees. They were massive wolves with fur as black as coal and eyes that burned like embers. They didn't run like normal animals. They moved with a cruel, cold grace that made my blood turn to ice. Soon after, the biggest wolf shifted. He didn't use clothes, he just stood there in the cold air, a man made of scars and muscle. "Is she the one?" the enforcer barked. He didn't look at my face. He looked at my neck, searching for the calmer's mark. Before he could move, my father pushed me forward. "Yes, Lord Enforcer. She's strong. She's just like her mother was." Yet I knew the truth. My mother died because the stress of calming the pack had broken her heart. To make things worse, the enforcer reached into a leather pouch and tossed a heavy bag of gold at my father's feet. The sound of the coins clinking was the loudest thing I had ever heard. Deep down, I knew the truth that I was just a bag of gold now. As a result, I didn't say goodbye. I didn't even look back as the enforcer gripped my arm and dragged me toward the cage. Moments later, the cage door slammed shut with a deafening clang. The sound echoed through the valley, marking the end of my life as a free girl. As if pulled by a string, the horses began to pull the cage, and the bumpy road jolted my bones. The enforcer rode his horse right next to my wooden bars. He was a mean-looking man with a scar across his nose. "Don't look so sad, little rabbit," he laughed. His voice was like sandpaper. "You're going to a palace, where most girls in the dregs would kill for a silk bed." I gripped the bars until my knuckles turned white. "Is it true? Is the king really feral? Does he really tear the throats out of the women you bring him? In fact, the man stopped laughing. He looked toward the mountains and crossed his chest. Alaric was a great king once, but the wolf took over. Now he's just a beast in a basement. You're not there for a silk bed, girl. You're there to be a bandage on a jagged wound. By the time we reached the Obsidian Citadel, I was covered in dust and sweat. The fortress was a giant, terrifying tooth carved into a black mountain. It looked like it was eating the sky. Wait, why did the air smell like rot and old blood even before we got inside? Because I was a calmer, I could feel the negative energy of the place pressing down on my lungs. No matter how hard I tried, I couldn't stop my hands from shaking. Eventually, the cage stopped in a courtyard filled with silent soldiers. Without another word, a man with gold blonde hair walked down the stone steps. This was Prince Valerius. He looked clean and rich, but his eyes were like two pieces of ice. He walked right up to my cage and peered through the bars. "She's a bit skinny, isn't she?" Valerius asked the enforcer. "Are you sure she has the gift? My brother is in a very foul mood today." I stood up straight and stared him in the eye. "I have enough gift to know you have a heart made of lead, Prince." As the silence stretched, the guards gasped. No one spoke to the prince like that, but then Valerius chuckled. It wasn't a happy sound. "A spitfire, I like that. It will make it more interesting when you finally break." He turned to the guards. "Take her to the wash chamber. Put her in the wedding silk. We don't have much time. The king is trying to dig his way through the silver floor again." Soon after, I was whisked away by 3 silent handmaids. They stripped my dirty clothes and scrubbed my skin until it was red. Not only that, but they brushed my hair so hard, it felt like they were pulling it out by the roots. Truth be told, I felt like a doll being painted for a funeral. They put me in a dress of white silk that was so thin I felt naked. Before I could move, they draped a heavy cloak of wolf fur over my shoulders. "Why the fur?" I asked the lead maid. "It's heavy." The woman looked at me with pity in her eyes. "It's so he recognizes the scent of a mate child. It might buy you an extra second before he lunges." Then we took a long walk through dark, wet hallways. The walls were dripping with moisture. Beneath the moonlight that spilled through the high cracks in the rock, I saw the silver door. It was covered in runes that glowed with a sick, green light. In the echo of his voice, a roar erupted from behind the door. It wasn't a wolf's howl. It was a sound of pure, unadulterated agony. That's why I felt my wolf stir in my chest, wanting to answer the cry. Without thinking, I stepped toward the silver door as the guards began to turn the heavy iron cranks. As the wind shifted, the smell of Alaric hit me. Cedar, rain, and the metallic tang of blood. In a single heartbeat, the world shifted. The prince leaned in close to my ear, his breath smelling of wine. "Don't die too quickly, Clara. I've grown fond of your temper." Instead of answering, I watched the door slide open. The guards shoved me inside, and the silver portal slammed shut behind me with a boom that felt like a funeral bell. At that moment, I was alone in the dark. The room was huge and smelled of wet earth. As fire bloomed beneath her skin, I saw him. The Alpha King was a shadow among shadows. He was a massive black wolf, his fur matted and his eyes glowing like twin suns of amber. Without another word, he crouched, his muscles bunching under his skin like coiled snakes. He was going to kill me. I could see the hunger in his gaze. A hunger for peace or a hunger for blood? Alaric, I whispered. My voice trembled, but I didn't move. I know you're in there. I can feel you. As if fate demanded it, the wolf lunged. He was a blur of teeth and fur. My body moved on instinct. I didn't run. I opened my arms wide and let my calmer resonance explode outward. Between one breath and the next, the air in the room turned warm and gold. The wolf froze. His front paws were inches from my chest, his hot breath hitting my face. As the silence roared, we stood there, frozen in time. With his scent in the air, I realized he wasn't trying to kill me. He was trying to find a way to stop the noise in his head. As my soul answered the silent plea in his eyes, I reached out. I touched his wet, cold nose with my bare fingers. Something inside me shifted. The moment my skin hit his fur, a bolt of lightning traveled up my arm. I felt it, etched in fire, the mate bond. It was thick, heavy, and unbreakable. Rather than snapping at me, the giant wolf let out a long, shuddering sigh. He leaned his heavy head into my palm, his eyes closing as the gold's light of my power washed over him. You're okay, I murmured, sliding my hand up to scratch behind his massive ears. I'm here. I'm not going to leave you. Maybe it was fate, but as I stroked him, I noticed something strange. Beneath the smell of the wolf, there was a chemical scent. It was sharp and bitter, which meant someone had been feeding him nightroot. In fact, he wasn't feral because of a curse. He was feral because he was being poisoned. As the truth unraveled, I felt a surge of protectiveness that nearly knocked me over. A growl rose in my throat as I looked at the closed silver door. Valerius wasn't trying to save his brother. He was the one killing him. As the bond pulsed, Alaric shifted his weight and slumped to the floor, pulling me down with him. He was so heavy, but I didn't mind. I sat in the dirt, cradling the head of the most dangerous creature in the world in my lap. Shadows danced between us as the moon moved across the sky. Under the weight of his stare, I realized I had found my purpose. I wasn't a victim of a debt anymore. I was the only thing standing between the king and the grave, and leaning my head against his fur as the silence of the citadel settled around them like a shroud. By the time the sun began to rise, I had a new plan. I was going to find the person who did this, and I was going to make them bleed. Truth be told, Calmer's rage was a terrifying thing. The tension broke when a small scrap of paper fell from Alaric's matted fur. It was a note, written in a hand I didn't recognize. Don't trust the one who brings the tea. Before the words left my lips, the door began to creak open again. The game was on. Come morning, the sun felt like a hot iron pressing against the silver door, but the real heat was the giant wolf sleeping against my chest. I woke up with my fingers buried in Alaric's thick, black fur, because even a monster needs a place to rest his weary head. My dress was ruined, covered in the dirt of the floor, yet I had never felt more alive. The king was breathing slowly, a deep thrum-thrum in his ribs that matched the beating of my own heart. In fact, I was so focused on the softness of his ears that I didn't hear the heavy boots clicking in the hallway until it was too late. I didn't know what scared me more, the sound of the approaching guards or the way my soul felt intertwined with the beasts. Moments later, the silver gears began to grind. I scrambled to my feet, my legs shaking like leaves in a storm. Before I could move, the door slid open, and Prince Valerius stepped inside. He was wearing a gold-stitched cloak that shimmered in the morning light, but his eyes were dark and full of secrets. He looked at me, then at the sleeping wolf, and a flicker of something that looked like fear crossed his face. "You're still alive," Valerius said, his voice dropping to a low, dangerous whisper. "I expected to find a pile of bones and a red floor. How did a little thing like you survive the night with a beast?" I wiped the dust from my face and stood tall. "Maybe the beast is more of a man than you think, Prince. He didn't touch me. He just wanted to sleep." "Is that a crime in your palace?" Truth be told, I wanted to scream at him about the poison. So I had to be smart. I had to be a fox in a den of wolves. Because my father had sold me to pay a debt, I knew that power only respected strength. If I showed my hand now, Valerius would just kill us both before the sun reached its peak. He wanted to sleep? Valerius laughed, and the sound made my skin crawl. Alaric hasn't slept in weeks. He usually spends his nights trying to tear his own skin off. You must have a very powerful gift, Clara. He stepped closer, the smell of wine and expensive soap clogging my nose. Or maybe you're just lucky. Still, luck runs out. Give him his medicine. He waved a hand, and a servant stepped forward carrying a silver tray. On the tray sat a steaming cup of tea. The smell hit me immediately, bitter, sharp, and oily. It was the night root. In that moment, I felt a surge of rage so hot it nearly made my wolf shift right then and there. No matter how hard I tried, I couldn't stop my hands from trembling as I looked at the cup. "He's sleeping now," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "The tea will only wake him up. Let him rest for just an hour more." Valerius grabbed my chin, his fingers digging into my jaw like talons. "The king needs his medicine to stay calm. You will feed it to him, or I will send your father to the mines by noon. Do you understand me, bride? One sip for the king, or one life for the dirt." Deep down, I knew the truth. The prince wasn't asking. He was threatening my family's life. As a result, I took the cup. The silver was hot against my palms, but it was nothing compared to the fire in my soul. Without thinking, I watched Valerius turn and walk out, leaving the guards at the door to watch through the iron grate. I was his bride. I was his prisoner. I was the person holding the poison that was killing my mate. Soon after, the silence returned to the room, heavy and thick as a winter fog. I stood over Alaric with the cup in my hand, watching his ears twitch as he dreamed of running free. As if pulled by a string, my wolf pressed forward in my mind, begging me to throw the liquid away. But then I remembered the guards' eyes at the door. They were watching. They were waiting for me to fail. If I didn't feed him, they would tell the prince, and the prince would finish the job with a silver blade. I knelt down in the dirt, the white silk of my dress soaking up the filth. "Alaric," I whispered, my voice thick with tears. "I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. They are making me do this." The moment their eyes locked, I saw the flash of gold. Alaric had opened one eye. He looked at the cup, and then he looked at me. As if fate whispered, I realized he knew exactly what was in that tea. He had been drinking it for years, watching his mind slip away while his brother smiled at him. Without another word, the massive wolf sat up, his shadow looming over me like a dark mountain of fur and grief. "I won't do it," I said, my voice suddenly strong. "I'm a calmer. I was born to heal, not to kill. I won't be his tool anymore. I won't be the one to put out your light." At that moment, I did something crazy. I took a sip of the tea myself. Because I was a calmer, my body reacted differently to shifter poisons. My vision blurred for a second. and a wave of cold nausea hit my stomach, but I didn't lose my mind. I needed to know how strong it was. As fire bloomed beneath my skin, I realized why Alaric couldn't fight it. It wasn't just poison. It was a magic spell that acted like a cage for the human soul. It tasted like rot and old memories. It was a moment of pure, desperate magic. I reached out and touched the stone floor, calling on the deep roots of the mountain. As the bond pulsed, I felt the water pipes running beneath the citadel. I used my power to pull fresh, clean water up through the cracks in the stone, filling an old wooden bowl in the corner. Next, I poured the tea into the dirt and replaced it with the mountain water, adding a few crushed petals from the fir bloom flower I had hidden in my pocket. "Drink this," I whispered, holding the bowl to his muzzle. "It's not poison. It's the mountain. It's life. It will wash the taste of him away." As if fate demanded it, Alaric lowered his head and drank. He drank like a man who had been in the desert for 1,000 years. Eventually he finished, and he looked at me with a look of such intense, raw gratitude that my chest ached. Beneath the moonlight, even though it was day, I felt our souls snap together. I was no longer just a girl who had been sold. I was his accomplice. I was his secret. I was the only person in the world he could trust. Without thinking, I stood up and walked toward the iron grate in the door. I held the empty silver cup high so the guards could see it. "He took the medicine," I shouted, my voice cold and hard. "Now leave us. The king needs his rest. Or do you want to explain to the prince why you woke him?" As the silence stretched, I heard the guards muttering to each other. Soon after, their footsteps faded away as they went to report to the prince. I leaned my back against the silver door and slid down to the floor, my heart racing like a trapped bird. Within the span of a breath, the wolf was there, his massive head resting on my shoulder. He was warm and he smelled like safety in wild places. "We have to hide it, Alaric," I whispered into his fur, my breath hot against his ear. "We have to pretend the poison is working. If Valerius thinks you are getting better, he will kill us both before the sun sets. We have to play the game until we are strong enough to break it." As the truth unraveled, I felt Alaric's wolf rumble in agreement. Rather than being a victim, he was starting to look like a hunter again. Because he was being poisoned. His muscles had been weak, but now that he was drinking real water, I could see the strength returning to his limbs. Truth be told, I was terrified. I was a girl with no weapons, trying to take down a prince and a council of alphas. I didn't know what scared me more, the danger we were in, or the way my heart skipped every time the wolf licked my hand. "I will find the antidote," I promised him, my voice cracking with emotion. "I will go to the gardens. I will find the sun root. It's the only thing that can break a night root spell for good. It's the only way to get your voice back." As if summoned, a vision of the Citadel gardens flashed in my mind. They were high up, near the prince's private rooms. It would be a suicide mission. Still, I looked at the king, the man who was trapped inside the beast, and I knew I couldn't stop. With every heartbeat, I felt the connection between us growing stronger, a golden rope that no silver door could hold. In fact, I would walk through fire for him now. In the quiet that followed, I made a vow to the moon and the stone. "I was sold for gold," I whispered, my hand stroking his matted fur. "But I will be paid in blood." Valerius thinks he bought a remedy, but he actually bought his own destruction. He has no idea what a calmer can do when she has something to fight for. As my wolf stirred, I felt a new kind of power rising in my gut. It wasn't just the calm anymore, it was something sharper, something darker. Before the words left my lips, Alaric let out a low, predatory growl that made the very air in the room vibrate. The king was waking up, and he was hungry for justice. As I was leaning into the darkness of the room as the first plan of their rebellion took root in my mind. By the time the guards returned with my lunch, I was sitting in the corner, looking like a broken, sad little bride. Moments later, as they looked through the grate, they saw the feral wolf pacing the room and snapping at the shadows. In that moment, the trap was set. As the sky darkened with the coming rain, I realized that the real fight was only just beginning. I have a plan to get to the gardens, but what if the prince is waiting for me there? Deep down, I knew the truth. The only way out was through the fire. I had to get those keys. I had to get to the sun. The citadel didn't just have walls, it had teeth that were waiting to bite anyone who tried to leave. I stood by the high, narrow window of my prison, watching the guards pace the courtyard, because in this place even the wind seemed to work for the prince. My white silk dress was stained with the black mud of Alaric's floor, and my hair was a bird's nest of tangles. Yet I felt a strange new fire in my chest that had nothing to do with fear. I needed a way out. I needed a plan. I needed the sun. Truth be told, I was terrified that Valerius would walk through that door and see the change in Alaric's eyes. Soon after, the silver door creaked open, but it wasn't the prince. It was a small, stout woman with gray hair and hands that smelled like lavender and flour. She carried a basket of clean linens and a bowl of thick soup. As the silence stretched, she looked at the giant wolf sleeping near my feet and let out a soft, sad sigh that filled the cold room. "You're a brave girl, Clara," she whispered, her voice like crinkling autumn leaves. "Most brides don't make it to the first morning. They usually end up as a memory or a stain on the floor. My name is Martha. I was your mother's friend once. I couldn't let another Calmer die in this hole." I jumped to my feet, my heart hammering against my ribs. "You knew my mother? Did she did she really die of the sickness? Or was it this place?" Martha looked toward the iron grate in the door and leaned in close. In fact, she was so close I could see the tears in her eyes and the fear etched in the wrinkles of her face. "She died of a broken heart, child." But it wasn't the pack that broke it. It was the secrets of this mountain. Because she was a Calmer, she saw things she wasn't supposed to see. She saw the prince mixing the roots. She saw the way the old king fell. What followed was a conversation that made my blood turn to ice. Martha told me that the citadel was built on lies and stolen power. She told me that Alaric had been a good man, a leader who protected the weak until the prince decided he wanted the crown for himself. Still, she warned me that the walls had ears and the shadows had eyes. "I need to get to the royal gardens, Martha," I said, grabbing her rough, flour-dusted hands. "I need the sun root. It's the only way to save him. It's the only way to wash the night root out of his veins." I didn't know what scared her more, the thought of being caught or the thought of Alaric staying a beast forever. Martha shook her head, her face turning pale as a ghost. "The gardens are forbidden, Clara. The prince keeps his most dangerous plants there. Because of that, only the high alchemists are allowed to enter. If they find you there, they won't just kill you. They will turn you into a warning for the rest of us. Instead of being scared, I felt a cold resolve. I have to try. If I stay here, we both die anyway. He's my mate, Martha. I can feel him screaming inside that fur. Please, tell me how to get there. Eventually, the old woman nodded. She reached into her apron and pulled out a small brass key that looked like it hadn't seen the light in years. This opens the servants' passage in the kitchen. It leads to the upper levels. Maybe it was fate, but I've been holding onto this for a long time, waiting for someone with your eyes. Just remember, if the prince finds you, I never gave you this. You found it in the dirt. By the time she left, my head was spinning like a top. I looked back at Alaric, who was watching me with this glowing amber eyes. He wasn't growling anymore, he was listening. Without thinking, I leaned down and kissed the top of his fuzzy head, smelling the cedar and the rain. I'll be back, I whispered. I promise I won't leave you in the dark. The bond pulsing like a warm light between us as I stepped toward the door. Next, I waited until the moon was high and the guards were heavy with sleep and ale. At that moment, I slipped through the silver door, which I had managed to keep unlatched with a piece of bone from my dinner. The hallways were dark and smelled of damp stone and old magic. From there, I found the kitchen, my bare feet silent on the cold floor. Because I was a calmer, I could feel the vibrations of the sleeping wolves in the rooms above me. It felt like walking through a room full of sleeping lions. Moments later, I found the small wooden door Martha had mentioned. The brass key turned with a soft click, and I slipped into a narrow, winding staircase. The air grew thinner and sweeter the higher I climbed. Not only that, but I could hear the faint sound of music coming from the prince's ballroom. What's worse, I realized I had to cross the main hallway to reach the glass doors of the garden. My heart was a drum, beating out a rhythm of pure terror. No matter how hard I tried, I couldn't stop my breath from coming in short, jagged gasps. But then I saw it, the glass garden. It was a massive dome of crystal that glowed under the moonlight like a fallen star. Inside, the plants were moving, their leaves waving as if they were dancing to the music from the palace. As if pulled by a string, I moved toward the entrance, but a low, guttural growl stopped me in my tracks. Without warning, a guard wolf stepped out from behind a stone statue. He was gray and scarred, his teeth bared in a silent threat. In the span of a breath, the world narrowed to me and the beast. Because I was a calmer, I didn't reach for a weapon. I didn't have one. I reached for my power instead. Easy, I whispered, projecting a wave of absolute peace. You don't want to hurt me. You want to go back to sleep. You want to dream of the forest and the hunt. Just close your eyes. As my wolf stirred, the golden energy rippled through the air like a warm breeze. The guard wolf's eyes glazed over and his tail stopped twitching. As the silence roared, he let out a long yawn and curled up on the rug, his heavy head resting on his paws. Truth be told, I felt like a thief in the night. But I didn't have a choice. I didn't know what scared me more, the wolf waking up or the sound of the ballroom doors opening nearby. Before I could move, I pushed open the glass doors and stepped into the heat of the garden. It was a jungle of strange smells and glowing flowers. As fire bloomed beneath her skin, I searched for the sunroot. It was supposed to be a plant, with leaves like gold and a stem that felt like a warm heartbeat. Wait, where was it? Martha said it grew near the center, under the largest glass panel where the moon could hit it. In fact, I found it hidden behind a wall of poisonous thorns. The plant was beautiful, glowing with a soft orange light that looked like a captured sunset. Because the thorns were sharp, I had to use my fur cloak to wrap the roots. With every heartbeat, I felt the life in the plant fighting back against the darkness of the citadel. I pulled it from the earth, the roots screaming in a way that only a calmer could hear. Between one breath and the next, I had it. I had the cure. Rather than feeling safe, a cold chill ran down my spine. Without thinking, I turned around and my heart skipped a beat. Standing in the doorway was Prince Valerius. He wasn't wearing his gold cloak anymore. He was dressed in black leather, and a long silver dagger was tucked into his belt. Under the weight of his stare, I felt like a bug pinned to a board. He looked at me with a look of pure, concentrated malice. "A midnight stroll, Clara?" he asked, his voice smooth and cold as a winter river. "And here I thought you were so dedicated to my brother. On the other hand, maybe you were just looking for a way to kill him faster so you could claim his gold." I hid the sunroot behind my back, my fingers digging into the wet dirt. I just needed air, Prince. The room is so dark, I couldn't breathe. I didn't think it was a crime to look at the flowers." As the silence stretched, Valerius walked toward me, his boots clicking on the glass floor. "You're a terrible liar, little bride, because your scent changed the moment you stepped into this garden. You smell like hope. And hope is a very dangerous thing in my house. It's like a weed that needs to be pulled." Before either could speak, he grabbed my arm, his grip so tight, I thought my bone would snap. In a single heartbeat, the world shifted. He pulled my arm out from behind my back, and the sunroot fell to the floor, its golden leaves glowing against the glass. To make things worse, he let out a bark of laughter that sounded like a dying crow. "Sunroot? You thought you could break the nightroot with this?" He kicked the plant away, his eyes turning into chips of flint. "Alaric is never coming back, Clara. He's going to die a beast, and you're going to be the one who takes the blame. Not only that, but you're going to help me finish the job tonight." As the truth unraveled, I realized he had planned this. He wanted me to find the root so he could catch me and tell the pack I was trying to poison the king. "I'll never help you," I spat, trying to pull away. "He's my mate. I can feel him. You can't kill a bond that strong." Valerius leaned in, his face inches from mine, smelling of sour wine and blood. "Mates are for children and fairy tales. In this world, there is only power. Because you tried to steal from me, your father is already on his way to the pits. What's worse, I'm going to tell the council that you were caught in the act. They will execute you, and I will be the hero who saved the monarchy from a traitorous bride." Without warning, the prince raised his hand to strike me. As if fate demanded it, a massive roar shook the glass dome. The crystal panels rattled, and the plants began to shiver. The tension broke when a giant black shadow smashed through the glass doors. It was Alaric. He had broken out. He had followed my scent. In that moment, the king didn't look feral. He looked like a god of war come to life. As fire bloomed beneath my skin, I saw the prince's face go pale. Between them, something cracked. Valerius dropped my arm and backed away, his hand fumbling for his silver dagger. But then, the wolf lunged. and I was watching as the darkness of the room exploded into a blur of fur and steel. Deep down, I knew the truth. The real war had just begun. I have to find that root. If I don't get it to him now, he'll lose control again. In fact, the cold mountain wind didn't just chill my skin, it carried the scent of 1,000 wolves waiting for blood. I stood in the middle of the shattered glass garden, my hand buried in Alaric's large, warm palm, because the boy who had been a beast was now a king made of starlight and fury. The High Council was coming. The heavy thud of their paws against the stone steps sounded like a drum beat for our execution. Yet, as I looked up at Alaric's face, I didn't see fear. I saw a predatory focus that made my own wolf howl with pride. Truth be told, I was still just a girl from the dregs in a ripped silk dress. But with him at my side, I felt like I could swallow the sun. Soon after, the massive doors to the garden courtyard were thrown open. 6 of the oldest, largest alphas I had ever seen marched in, their gray fur bristling and their eyes narrow with suspicion. As the silence stretched, they stopped dead. They didn't see a feral beast or a dead bride. They saw Alaric, standing tall and naked in the moonlight, holding the man who had tried to steal his crown by the throat. I didn't know what scared me more, the cold judgment of the council or the way Alaric's grip on Valerius tightened until the prince's face turned purple. Alaric? The oldest alpha, a man named Hakon, whispered. His voice was thick with shock. The report said you were lost. They said the madness had taken your soul and you were eating the walls. Alaric stepped forward, dragging Valerius like a sack of garbage. What followed was a voice that shook the very foundations of the Citadel. The reports were lies fed to you by a traitor. I was not lost. I was buried alive by my own blood, while you all sat in your hands and watched. In that moment, he tossed Valerius to the center of the circle. The prince hit the stone with a wet thud, gasping for air and clutching his bruised neck. Still, the prince was a snake until the very end. She did it, Valerius wheezed, pointing a shaking finger at me. The girl, she used forbidden magic to wake him. She's a witch sent from the dregs to destroy our traditions. She stole the sun root from your sacred garden. Because the council was old and stuck in their ways, they turned their harsh gazes toward me. No matter how hard I tried, I couldn't stop myself from flinching under the weight of their stares. But then Alaric moved. He stepped in front of me, his massive body acting as a shield against their hatred. In the span of a breath, the air in the garden grew heavy with the scent of alpha authority. She is not a witch, Alaric roared, and the glass shards on the floor rattled. She is my mate. She is the calmer who saw the truth when all of you were blind. In fact, if it weren't for her, I would be a corpse and you would be bowing to a murderer. Do any of you have a problem with my choice? What followed was a low, rumbling murmur from the council members. Still, Hakon stepped forward, his eyes locked on the glowing sun root still clutched in my hand. That plant is forbidden, King. To use it is to break the ancient laws of the pack. To touch it is a crime against the moon. To make things worse, you have claimed a bride without the trial of blood. The law says she must be tested to see if her soul is strong enough to lead us. I didn't know what scared me more, the trial of blood, or the look of pure, cold rage on Alaric's face. As the truth unraveled, I realized that the prince wasn't the only enemy. The law itself was a cage designed to keep us small. Because of that, I stepped out from behind Alaric's shadow. I was tired of being a tool. I was tired of being a debt paid in gold. Test me then, I said, my voice echoing in the quiet garden. I have nothing to hide. I have given everything to save your king. If that is a crime, then your laws are as rotten as the prince's heart. I am a calmer, and I am his mate. What more do you need? As my wolf stirred, a golden light began to swirl around my feet. It wasn't the soft calm from before. It was something sharper, something that tasted like justice and iron. Before the words left my lips, the council members shifted into their wolf forms. They weren't just men anymore, they were 5 massive gray wolves with teeth like daggers. They were going to hunt me right there in the garden. Rather than letting them lunge, Alaric let out a warning growl that made the very air in the room vibrate. If you hunt her, you hunt me, Alaric whispered, his eyes turning back into that terrifying, glowing amber. Between one breath and the next, the tension in the room snapped. Suddenly, the shadows in the corner of the garden moved. Without warning, 3 of Valerius's personal assassins, wolves who hadn't shifted back, lunged from the darkness of the bushes. They weren't interested in the trial. They were here to finish the prince's work before the king could speak again. At that moment, Alaric didn't hesitate. He shifted in midair, a blur of black fur and pure muscle. What's worse, he didn't just fight them. He destroyed them. As if fate demanded it, I watched my mate move like a shadow, his teeth finding throats and his claws tearing through their leather armor. With every heartbeat, I felt his rage through the bond. It was beautiful and terrifying all at once. I felt it, etched in fire, the realization that Alaric wasn't just defending his throne. He was defending us. Soon after, the fight was over. The assassins lay still on the glass-covered floor, their blood soaking into the roots of the flowers. Alaric stood over them, his black fur stained red, his chest heaving with exertion. As the silence roared, he turned back to the council, his snout dripping blood. Eventually, he shifted back to his human form, his eyes never leaving Hakon's face. He looked like a god who had just come back from the underworld. "Is the trial over?" Alaric asked, his voice low and deadly. "Or do you need more blood to be satisfied that she belongs at my side? Speak now, or never speak again." Hakon looked at the fallen assassins, then at the sun root in my hand, and finally at the raw power radiating from the king. Truth be told, the old wolf was finally afraid of what he had helped create. In the stillness that followed, he lowered his head. One by one, the other council members followed suit, bowing their heads to the returned king and his desperate bride. I felt a wave of relief so strong my knees almost gave out. Yet, as I looked at the prince, I saw him crawling toward the shattered glass doors. Before I could move, I realized he wasn't trying to escape into the night. He was reaching for a small silver whistle tucked into his belt. In a single heartbeat, the world shifted. A high-pitched sound pierced the air, a sound so sharp it made my ears bleed. It was a signal for the darkness waiting outside the walls. "You're too late," Valerius screamed, blood bubbling at the corner of his mouth. "The rogues are already at the gates. I promised them the Citadel if they helped me kill you. They don't care about your laws or your mate." Deep down, I knew the truth. The Citadel was surrounded by an army of monsters who had nothing to lose. The rogue attack the prince had planned wasn't just a rumor to scare me. It was happening right now. As the sky darkened with the smoke of 100 torches rising from the valley below, I realized our victory was very short lived. The real battle for the mountain had just begun. Without another word, Alaric grabbed me and pulled me toward the high balcony. We have to get to the wall, Clara. If the gates fall, they will kill everyone. As my wolf pressed forward, I felt the vibration of the first ram hitting the iron gates, and her heart racing as I prepared to use my power on a scale I never dreamed of. Moments later, the sky wasn't dark anymore. It was a bruised, angry purple from the smoke of 1,000 burning torches. I stood on the high stone ramparts of the citadel, my hair whipping around my face like a tangle of black silk. Because the army at our gates wasn't a group of men, but a sea of starving, maddened monsters. The sound of their howling was a wall of noise that made my bones vibrate. Truth be told, I had never seen so many rogues in one place, their mismatched fur and scarred bodies a testament to a life of hunger and hate. The smell of burning pitch and wet fur was so thick, I could taste it on the back of my tongue. I didn't know what scared me more, the claws of the monsters below, or the way Alaric's hand squeezed mine until it almost hurt. What followed was a command that cut through the chaos like a silver blade. Alaric stood beside me, his bare chest glistening with the sweat of the previous fight. "Archers to the wings, shifters to the gate," he roared, and the air around him seemed to thicken with the scent of a true alpha. Still, I could feel the weakness in his spirit, a lingering shadow from the night root that still lived in his blood. Because he was my mate, I could feel his heart hammering a frantic rhythm against his ribs. He was trying to lead an army while his own soul was still waking up from a long nightmare. How could he fight a war when he was still fighting for his own mind? "You can't do this alone, Alaric," I said, my voice trembling but loud enough to be heard over the screams. "You're still recovering. Let me help you. Let me use the calm to slow them down." Yet Alaric turned to me, his amber eyes burning with a protective fire. "No, Clara. If you use your power on this many wolves at once, it will drain the life right out of you. I won't lose you again." In fact, I saw the desperation in his eyes, a fear that was deeper than the fear of death. He wasn't just a king. He was a man who had finally found something worth living for. He didn't want me to be a tool. He wanted me to be safe. By the time the first rogue reached the top of the wall, I knew I had to make a choice. Would you stay safe and watch your world burn? Or would you risk your life to save the man you love? As if pulled by a string, I watched a massive gray rogue lunge for Alaric's throat. Without thinking, I didn't wait for his permission. In a single heartbeat, the world shifted. I reached out and grabbed Alaric's arm, pouring every ounce of my golden light into his body. As fire bloomed beneath her skin, Alaric let out a roar that sounded like the mountain itself was breaking in half. He shifted in the blink of an eye, becoming a black beast so large and powerful that the rogues nearby actually stopped in their tracks. It wasn't the feral shift from before. This was a shift of pure, focused power. I let my own strength flowing out of me like water through a broken dam. Next, the battle moved from the walls to the very heart of the courtyard. The iron gates groaned and finally snapped under the pressure of a massive battering ram. What followed was a flood of violence as the rogues poured into our home like a river of teeth. Still, I didn't run. I stood on the stairs of the great hall, my arms spread wide as I projected a field of peace that acted like a physical wall. Because I was a calmer, I could see the threads of madness connecting the rogues to each other. They weren't just attacking, they were being driven by a single dark will. They moved like puppets on a string. It's a hive mind, I shouted to Alaric through our mental bond. Someone is controlling them. It's the silver whistle. Valerius is nearby. Soon after, I saw him. Valerius was standing on a high balcony, the silver whistle pressed to his lips. He wasn't even fighting. He was just watching the slaughter with a cold, bored expression. To make things worse, he had Martha, the old cook, held by her throat over the edge of the stone railing. Martha looked at me, her eyes full of terror, and I felt a sharp pang in my chest. Martha had been my only friend. She had given me the key to the garden. She was my found family, and now she was being used as bait. I didn't know what scared me more, the thought of Martha falling or the realization that Valerius had planned this sacrifice all along. No matter how hard I tried, I couldn't ignore the bond that was screaming at me to protect the innocent. He wasn't just trying to win a war, he was trying to break my spirit. Before I could move, Alaric was blocked by 3 rogue alphas, their bodies stitched together with dark magic. He was trapped. He was being torn apart. In that moment, I realized the truth about myself. I wasn't just a bride or a remedy. I was the source of his strength. Because the bond was a two-way street, I could give him my life force to keep him fighting. Take it, Alaric, everything I have, I screamed into the mental link. As the bond pulsed, a bridge of golden light formed between us in the middle of the blood-stained courtyard. Within the span of a breath, Alaric's fur began to glow with a brilliant silver light that blinded the rogues. He moved like a ghost, a blur of shadow and starlight, turning the tide of the battle in a single minute. Yet, as he grew stronger, I felt my own knees grow weak. The world began to spin. My vision blurred. In the quiet that followed, the first wave of the attack, I felt my spirit start to fray at the edges, like a piece of cloth being pulled too tight. Eventually, the courtyard was filled with the bodies of the fallen, and the air smelled like a butcher shop. Alaric shifted back to his human form, his skin covered in the blood of his enemies. He looked at me, and truth be told, the look of agony on his face was worse than any wound. He saw me swaying on the stairs. Before either could speak, the sound of the silver whistle changed. It grew higher, sharper, and more painful, a shriek that felt like a needle in the brain. As the silence roared, every wolf in the citadel, friend and foe alike, collapsed to the ground, clutching their heads in pain. I felt it, etched in fire. The sound was a weapon designed to shatter a shifter's soul. Because I was a calmer, my mind was shielded from the worst of the frequency. I was the only one who could still stand. I looked up at the balcony and saw Valerius laughing, his eyes wide with a manic, crazy light. He blew the whistle harder, and I saw Alaric fall to his knees, a cry of pain ripped from his throat. In fact, Valerius didn't care about his pack or his kingdom. He just wanted to be the last one standing. Deep down, I knew the truth. The only way to stop the sound was to destroy the whistle, even if it meant my life. Without another word, I began to climb the stone stairs toward the prince. My feet were bare and bleeding from the glass shards on the floor. Step, step, step. With every heartbeat, the sound of the whistle tried to tear my mind apart. As my wolf stirred, I felt a new kind of power rising from the very base of my spine. It wasn't the calm anymore. It was a roar of pure feminine rage. I wasn't a girl from the dregs. I was the alpha queen. And I was done being afraid. I was done being a victim. As if fate demanded it, I reached the balcony just as Valerius raised the whistle for one final lethal note. The tension broke when I lunged for him, not with a knife, but with a psychic burst of absolute crushing silence. In that moment, the whistle shattered into 1,000 pieces of silver dust. Crack. But then, Valerius grabbed me. His hands locked around my neck like iron bands. He snarled, his eyes full of hate, and he pulled me toward the edge. As if fate whispered, I realized there was no other way. I threw my weight backward, taking him with me. My eyes locked on Alaric's terrified face as they fell through the smoke toward the stones below. Between one breath and the next, the world was just wind and gravity. I saw Alaric reaching for me, his hand outstretched, his voice calling my name. My world tilted, and the last thing I saw before the darkness closed in was the green glow of a secret cellar door flying open beneath the citadel. What was hidden in the dark? I didn't know what scared me more, the impact, or what was about to crawl out of that green light. Wait. If the whistle is gone, why is the ground still shaking? And who is the figure stepping out of the green light? In that moment, the ground didn't just stop coming. It seemed to swallow the air right out of my lungs. I hit the stone floor of the hidden cellar with a bone-jarring thud. Because the fall hadn't killed me, but the darkness was certainly trying to. My vision was a swirl of gray and green, and the metallic, iron-like taste of blood filled my mouth as I gasped for air. Still, I could hear Valerius groaning nearby, his body tangled in the broken wooden crates he had landed on like a discarded puppet. I tried to move my legs, but they felt like heavy lead, and my head was spinning in a sickening circle. I didn't know what scared me more, the sharp pain in her chest or the sickly neon green glow pulsing from the center of the damp room. What followed was a sound that made my skin crawl and my stomach churn. It wasn't a growl and it wasn't a hum. It was a wet, slithering noise like 1,000 snakes moving over shards of broken glass. Next, a figure stepped out from the pulsing green light, and my heart nearly stopped dead in my chest. It was a man, but he wasn't a wolf. At least not anymore. His skin was translucent, showing the black, rotting veins beneath. And his eyes were hollow pits of shadow that seemed to drink in the light. In fact, he looked like a nightmare made of smoke and old, forgotten graves. This was the Shadow Alchemist, the one who had been helping Valerius brew the night root in secret. Because I was a calmer, I could feel the sheer, oily malice radiating from him like heat from a furnace. The little bride survived, the alchemist hissed, his voice sounding like dry leaves blowing over a fresh grave. How disappointing for the prince. And how inconvenient for me. To make things worse, you've broken my favorite silver whistle. He raised a hand, and the green light flared, wrapping around my throat like a cold, slimy vine that squeezed tight. No matter how hard I tried, I couldn't draw a single breath. The world began to dim at the edges, turning a fuzzy gray. But then, the heavy cellar door above us was ripped from its iron hinges with a scream of metal. Soon after, a massive black shadow dropped into the room from the ramparts above. It was Alaric. His fur was standing on end, and his eyes were glowing with a desperate, wild heat. He didn't shift back into a man this time. He stayed in his wolf form, his teeth bared as he faced the alchemist in the dark. Yet, as he took a brave step forward, the green light hit his chest and he let out a whimper of pure, agonizing pain that broke my heart. As if pulled by a string, I saw the silver collar on his neck begin to glow with a cursed radiance. Deep down, I knew the truth. The collar wasn't just a mark of the king, it was a conduit for the alchemist's dark magic. Alaric was being paralyzed from the inside out, his powerful muscles freezing like stone. In the quiet that followed, the alchemist laughed, a cold, hollow sound that echoed off the wet stone walls. You think a beast can stop a god, little king? I have spent years perfecting the rot in your blood. Because of that, you are mine to break, piece by agonizing piece. What's worse? I saw Valerius dragging himself toward the alchemist, a jagged piece of glass clutched in his shaking hand. He looked at me with a look of pure, unadulterated hatred that made me shiver. I didn't know what scared me more, the alchemist's magic or the look of a man who had absolutely nothing left to lose. Kill her first, Valerius wheezed, pointing the sharp glass at my throat. I want him to watch her die. I want him to feel the bond snap while he's still awake to suffer. Wait. I looked at Alaric, his amber eyes locked on mine with a pleading, hopeless intensity. He was fighting the paralysis with everything he had, his massive muscles twitching and his snout dripping with foam. In that moment, I felt a wave of despair so heavy, it felt like the entire mountain was sitting on my chest. My power was gone. I was drained like an empty well. I had given every spark of my light to Alaric on the ramparts, and now I was nothing but a girl in the dirt. Rather than fighting, I felt a cold, numb acceptance. I had failed as a protector. I had failed as a mate. As if fate whispered, I heard Martha's voice echoing in the back of my mind. Your mother saw things she wasn't supposed to see. What followed was a sudden, sharp memory of my mother's old silver locket. It wasn't just a piece of jewelry, it was a focus, a way for a calmer to gather the energy of the earth itself. Before she could move, the alchemist raised his translucent hand to deliver the killing blow. Still, I didn't close my eyes in fear. I reached into my torn bodice and gripped the silver locket until the metal bit into my palm, drawing blood. Because the bond was still there, faint and flickering like a candle in a storm, I reached for the last spark of Alaric's spirit. But then, the alchemist's magic slammed into me like a physical fist. In a single heartbeat, the world shifted. I felt my soul being pulled from my body, drifting into a cold, gray void where there was no sound and no heat. She felt it, etched in fire, the moment her connection to Alaric was severed by the dark light. The bond went ice cold. The warmth of his spirit disappeared. As the silence roared, I realized the worst thing of all. Alaric wasn't fighting anymore. He had given up the ghost because he thought I was already dead. Eventually, the green light faded, leaving the cellar in a suffocating, pitch-black darkness. I lay on the floor, my breath shallow and ragged, feeling the cold stone against my cheek. I couldn't feel Alaric's heart. I couldn't feel my own wolf. I was just nothing. Truth be told, I had finally reached my lowest point. I was alone in the dark with a monster and a madman. Without another word, Valerius stepped over my broken body, his heavy boots sounding like thunder on the stone. He walked toward the paralyzed king and raised the jagged piece of glass high above his head. Now, brother, Valerius whispered, his voice full of a sick, twisted joy that made the shadows dance. Now the crown and your life is finally mine. As the truth unraveled, I saw the glass start to descend toward Alaric's exposed throat. Within the span of a breath, everything I had fought for was about to be destroyed. Because I was empty, I couldn't move a finger. I couldn't even scream. I could only watch the end. She didn't know what scared her more, the death of the king or the realization that she was going to survive, just long enough to see her world end. In the quiet that followed, the only sound was the drip, drip, drip of water from the ceiling. Moments later, a shadow moved in the corner of the cellar, separate from the alchemist. As fire bloomed beneath her skin, I saw a pair of glowing silver eyes that didn't belong to any wolf I knew. Rather than the end, it felt like a beginning. Wait, who was that? And why did the air suddenly smell like the dregs after a heavy rain? I felt it, etched in fire. A new power was waking up in the dark, and it didn't belong to the alchemist. As if summoned, a low, vibrating hum began to fill the room. It was the sound of 1,000 comers singing together. Maybe it was fate, but I realized I wasn't alone. The spirits of the women who had died in this citadel were rising. In that moment, the darkness didn't feel so cold anymore. My eyes closing as she prepared to let the ghost take over. The silver resurrection. Still, the darkness didn't stay quiet for long, because the silence was suddenly torn apart by a sound that didn't come from a human throat. It was the silver roar, a high, vibrating hum that echoed from the very stones of the cellar walls. I felt my mother's silver locket grow hot against my palm, burning like a coal pulled straight from a forge. In that moment, I realized the silver eyes glowing as the corner weren't a new enemy. They were the spirits of every calmer woman who had ever been broken by this mountain. They were the mothers, the daughters, and the brides who had been used as tools until they had nothing left to give. I didn't know what scared me more, the cold ghosts of the past or the sudden, violent surge of power that felt like a river of white lightning flooding her empty veins. "You are not alone, Clara," a voice whispered in the back of my mind, sounding just like my mother's lullabies. What followed was a transformation of the very light in the room. The sickly, neon green glow of the shadow alchemist was pushed back by a brilliant, pure silver radiance that smelled like fresh rain and crushed lavender. Next, I felt my fingers twitch, then my arms, as the spirits poured their ancient strength into my broken, battered body. In fact, I didn't just stand up. I rose from the dirt like a flame being fanned by a gale. My skin was tingling, and the pain in my chest vanished as the silver light knit my bones back together. The alchemist shrieked, his translucent skin blistering and smoking under the silver light. Because I was the last living calmer of the royal line, I was the only bridge they had left to finish what they had started generations ago. "Get away from him!" I screamed. And my voice didn't sound like a girl's anymore. It sounded like a choir of 1,000 angry women echoing through the stone. Before she could move, a massive wave of silver energy erupted from the locket, hitting Valerius just as he tried to lunge at Alaric. As if pulled by a string, the prince was thrown across the room, his body slamming into the stone wall with a sickening crack. No matter how hard she tried, Clara couldn't find a single spark of pity for the man who had sold her for a bag of salt. But then, the alchemist raised his black-veined hands, trying to weave a new cage of shadows around us to block the light. Soon after, the spirits began to swirl around Alaric in a beautiful, terrifying dance. Their silver forms dove into his matted fur and sank deep into his skin, searching for the rot. Yet I could see the struggle in his amber eyes as the poison in his blood fought against the healing light. It was a war inside his veins. As her wolf stirred, I realized that the spirits could provide the raw power, but only I could provide the anchor to keep him human. Deep down, she knew the truth. To save the king, I had to walk directly into the alchemist's shadow and tear the curse out by its roots with my bare hands. Rather than waiting for permission, I stepped into the green fire, my skin sizzling as the dark magic tried to eat me alive. Without thinking, I reached out and grabbed the alchemist's wrists, my silver light clashing with his black rot in a spray of sparks. The moment their eyes locked, I saw the centuries of pain he had caused, and I felt his cold, oily fear. He was afraid of me. What followed was a psychic battle that made my skull feel like it was cracking into pieces. It was a storm of memories, his and mine, clashing in the dark. Still, I didn't let go, even when the green fire climbed up my arms and tried to choke the life out of me. Because the bond with Alaric was pulsing again, loud and clear, I used it like a tether to keep myself from drifting into the void. "You have no power here," I roared, and the silver locket shattered in my hand, releasing a final blinding burst of energy that dissolved the alchemist into a cloud of foul-smelling smoke. He didn't even have time to scream. As the silence roared, the green light vanished, replaced by the soft, steady glow of the spirits. Moments later, I saw the silver collar around Alaric's neck snap into pieces. Crack! The dark magic was finally, truly broken. I felt it, etched in fire, the moment Alaric's human mind surged back to the surface, stronger and clearer than it had ever been in his life. He shifted back into a man right before my eyes, his skin smooth and his eyes a brilliant, piercing amber. As fire bloomed beneath her skin, he caught me before I could hit the floor, his arms feeling like heated iron around my waist. "Clara." His voice was a low, rough melody that made my heart skip a beat. "You came back for me. You fought the dead for me." I reached up and touched his face, feeling the warmth of his skin and the rough stubble on his jaw. "I told you I wouldn't leave you in the dark, Alaric. Truth be told, I think the dark is more afraid of us now." In the quiet that followed, we stayed there for a heartbeat, just breathing each other in, tasting the salt and the silver in the air. But then, the sound of the rogue army howling above us reminded me that the palace was still under siege. To make things worse, Valerius was gone. The spot where he had fallen was empty, leaving only a trail of dark blood leading toward the secret escape tunnels. "He won't get far," Alaric growled, his voice vibrating through my chest. "He has taken enough from us, Clara. Tonight he pays the debt." Eventually, Alaric stood up, pulling me with him as if I were as light as a feather. He looked like a king again, but there was something more, a divine silver aura that clung to him like a second skin. He looked powerful. He looked legendary. As if fate whispered, I realized that the final push wouldn't be a fight with teeth and claws alone. It would be a reclamation of the very soul of the pack. Without another word, we began to climb the stone stairs out of the cellar, the spirits of the Calmers trailing behind us like a shimmering starlight cape. With every heartbeat, I felt my strength returning, fueled by the love of the man who held my hand as if it were the most precious thing in the world. As the sky darkened even further with the smoke of the battle, we stepped back into the main courtyard. The fighting stopped instantly, as if someone had pulled a lever. The rogues, the council, and the remaining guards all turned their heads to look at the man who had just walked out of the earth. Rather than shifting into a beast, Alaric just stood there in his human form, his presence so heavy and powerful that the very air seemed to bow down to him. The wolves whimpered and lowered their tails. Because he had been reborn through the silver roar, he was no longer just an alpha. He was the moon's chosen. He was the protector they had all forgotten. "The king is back!" Martha's voice rang out from the ramparts, and a cheer erupted from the survivors that shook the trees in the valley below. But then, the iron gates of the citadel were kicked open one last time with a thunderous bang. Valerius stood there, his eyes crazed and blood streaming down his pale face. He was backed by the last 10 of the rogue alphas, their fur matted and their eyes red with madness. She didn't know what scared her more, the prince's obvious madness or the fact that he was holding a burning torch over a large barrel of black powder. "If I can't have this mountain, no one will," Valerius screamed, his voice cracking like dry glass. "I'll blow this citadel to the stars. I'll kill every last one of you." As the truth unraveled, I saw the final trap. He wasn't trying to win a throne anymore. He was trying to commit a massacre. He wanted to take the whole mountain with him into the grave. Within the span of a breath, the world narrowed down to that single, flickering orange flame in his hand. In a single heartbeat, the world shifted. Alaric didn't move toward the prince. He knew he wasn't fast enough to stop the torch. He looked at me, and I knew exactly what he needed from his bride. He needed my shield. "Clara, now!" he shouted. And she let it happen, her hands glowing with the last of the silver light as she stepped in front of the pack. I didn't feel like a girl from the dregs anymore. I felt like a goddess. I gathered the energy of the mountain, the strength of the spirits, and the love in my heart into a single, massive golden dome. Between one breath and the next, Valerius let go of the torch. No! With every step he took back into the shadows, the fire fell toward the powder. The air thickened as the explosion began to bloom like a giant, angry flower of fire and smoke. Can a single calmer shield an entire kingdom from a mountain-level blast? And what will Alaric do to the brother who finally pushed the world too far? In that moment, the world didn't just end. It exploded into a wall of white heat that felt like 1,000 suns. I stood with my arms spread wide, my fingers clawing at the empty air, because the black powder was meant to turn the citadel into a stone tomb for everyone I loved. The orange fire of the blast hit my golden shield with the force of a falling moon, and the sound was a roar that swallowed every other noise in the universe. Truth be told, I thought my bones were going to shatter under the weight of the mountain. Yet, I felt Alaric's heavy hands on my waist, his primal strength flowing into me like a river of liquid iron. She didn't know what scared her more, the fire trying to eat her alive, or the raw, terrifying power of the bond that was keeping her upright. What followed was a struggle that felt like a lifetime, but lasted only a few seconds. Next, the fire began to die down, sucked away by the cold mountain wind that rushed in through the broken gates. In fact, my golden dome had held, but the courtyard was a blackened mess of smoke and shattered obsidian. Because I was a calmer, I had used the spirits of the fallen women to weave the light into a net that caught every piece of flying debris. The pack was safe. The mountain was still standing. But then, through the drifting gray smoke, I saw him. Valerius was trying to crawl away into the dark forest, his royal clothes singed and his face a mask of cowardice. Soon after, Alaric let go of me. He didn't say a word, and he didn't need to. As if pulled by a string, he shifted into his massive black wolf form, his fur glowing with that new, divine silver starlight. No matter how hard she tried, Clara couldn't look away from the justice that was about to happen. Still, Alaric didn't kill him with his teeth as the prince expected. Rather than a bloody end, he pinned the prince to the ground with a single heavy paw and let out a howl that wasn't a call for death but a call for judgment. What's worse for Valerius was the sight of the High Council walking out of the shadows, their eyes finally clear of the shadow alchemist's haze. Eventually, the dawn began to break over the jagged peaks, painting the sky in shades of pink and burning gold. In the quiet that followed, the survivors of the attack gathered in the courtyard. The rogues who were still alive were rounded up, but they weren't snarling anymore because the silver whistle was gone, and my calm had finally washed away the alchemist's chemical madness. Without another word, Hakan, the old alpha, stepped toward me. He wasn't looking at the king this time. He was looking at the girl from the dregs who had held a kingdom together. "The debt is paid," Hakan said, his voice deep and solemn like a tolling bell. "The traitor will spend his remaining days in the dark pits he designed for others. In fact, the pack owes its life to the bride we almost executed for being different. We were wrong, Clara. You are not a remedy. You are our queen." As if fate whispered. I realized the open loop of my family's safety was finally being closed. Before either could speak, a group of guards led my father and siblings into the courtyard. They weren't in chains. They were dressed in warm, expensive furs and looked well-fed. I felt it, etched in fire, the moment her little brother ran to her, his small arms wrapping around her waist in a tight squeeze. Because I had survived the beast and the fire, my family was finally free from the gray mud of the dregs. Truth be told, I didn't even feel angry at my father anymore. I just felt a deep, peaceful pity for a man who had been so afraid of the world that he sold his own heart to buy a little safety. "Forgive me, Clara," my father whispered, his eyes downcast and wet with tears. I looked at Alaric, then back at the man who had traded me for salt. "I've already forgotten the debt, Papa. Go home to the valley. Take the gold the king gave you and build something good. Just don't ever look back at this mountain." As my wolf stirred, I felt the last tether to her old life snap with a quiet pop. I wasn't a daughter of the dregs anymore. I was something legendary. By the time the sun was high in the sky, the true coronation began. It wasn't a fancy party with modern things. It was a ritual of blood, bone, and starlight. As the bond pulsed, Alaric took my hand and bit his own palm, then mine, pressing our wounds together in front of the entire pack. In a single heartbeat, the world shifted. I wasn't just a girl from the dregs anymore. I was the Moon Queen. Because our souls were now one, I could feel every heart in the Citadel beating in time with mine. I could feel the forest. I could feel the wind. I could feel the future. What followed was a feast that lasted for 3 days. We ate fresh meat and drank pure mountain water, and for the first time in 100 years, the wolves and the Calmers sat at the same table as equals. Still, the best part was the quiet moments at night. Beneath the moonlight, Alaric and I stood on the highest balcony of the citadel, watching the valley below. As her wolf stirred, I realized I didn't need to hide my scent or my power ever again. I was home. Truth be told, I was no longer the Alpha King's desperate bride. I was his sovereign. "You're thinking about the first day," Alaric murmured, his arms wrapping around me from behind, his chin resting on my shoulder. "About the cage." "I'm thinking about how the cage was the only way to find you," I replied, leaning back into his heat. "I thought I was a tool, Alaric. I thought I was just a remedy for a sick king." He turned me around, his amber eyes glowing with a love so deep it made my breath catch in my throat. "You were the cure for my soul, Clara. You are the fire that keeps the beast away." And my head resting on his chest as the shadows danced between them. No longer frightening, but welcoming. Deep down, I knew the truth. The remedy wasn't the sunroot. The remedy was us. Final scene. Impression. Clara and Alaric shifting together, their coats now permanently streaked with silver starlight from the spirits. We let out a joint, harmonious howl that echoed across the entire kingdom, signaling a new age where no daughter was ever sold, and every wolf was finally, truly free. We ran into the sunrise, two legends born from a single desperate kiss.